Hi, Amy Adamo from Evolutions, back for another segment on mobility and self-massage techniques. Today I'd like to talk to you about the feet or the foot. Many times we're not given a lot of thought to the foot. Maybe that's because we don't think about it much and how it supports our body. Maybe we don't really like looking at our feet. There can be lots of different reasons that we're not paying attention to the care of our feet. But remember, this is the support, the base of our entire body column. It's also where we connect with the earth and where we get energy from the earth. So it's a really important piece for us to be paying attention to. If you have a history of some plantar fasciitis issues or Achilles tendonitis issues or other foot issues, maybe you're a pronator or a supinator, there's a lot of underlying contributing factors to that. And so one specific label isn't always a great thing to look at. And so today I'd like to talk with you about how to address not just the foot, but the ankle and a little further up the chain. So let's talk about the foot anatomy first. Hopefully you can see my foot here pretty well. We often think about the whole foot, but if we break it up into three basic segments, we got our toes, which comes to about this point where they flex and bend, flex and extend. Then we have the midfoot, which runs from about that point at the base of your toes, that joint, to somewhere around just below the ankle. And then we basically have the heel of the foot and then coming up into the ankle. So the toes, then we have our midfoot, which is kind of made up of two different segments of bone, metatarsals, which are the long bones of the foot, and then coming back further into the arch area are the tarsals, and the calcaneus makes up one of those, and then we come up into the ankle. So in terms of motion of the foot, obviously we think about our toes flexing and extending. That's pretty easy to think about. We don't think much about the motion of our forefoot, but maybe pronation and supination are two different things to think about. And then we have our ankle extension and flexion and internal and external rotation. So those are some of the basic motions of the foot that can be restricted over time, maybe because of injury, maybe because of just wear and tear in the way we live life. So for mobilizing, you have a couple different things you can do. We're going to introduce some tools today too, but just using your hands. Using your hands on your feet is one of the easiest ways to go about mobilizing the feet. And obviously you have your hands and your feet with you at all times, so that's pretty easy. So if we think about the toes first, I have some kind of funky toes. They're really close together and they curl a lot at the end, so I don't have great mobility in some of those toes. But just flexing and extending your toes on your own, or using your hand to do that, taking your toes in your hand and flexing and extending, is one way to just work on some mobility. You can take your fingers and massage your toes. Remember, these tendons come all the way up through your foot and into your toes. So massaging the base of your toes all the way out to the tips feels really good and can sometimes also help you with stretching and getting some flexibility in there. You can also handshake with your feet. This is really hard for me because I don't have great mobility in my toes, but essentially taking your fingers and putting them in between your toes like you're handshaking. So if you were to interlace your fingers together, really easy, but trying to get your fingers in between your toes for some, including me, is very challenging. My toes are very tight. But once I can get my fingers in there a little bit, I can use these fingers to move my toes around. Now, that's not super comfortable for me because my toes are tight. But be gentle, take care, just start slow, and eventually if you get some more mobility in your toes, you may be able to get your fingers into those toe webbing spaces all the way through. I can squeeze in on my fingers with my toes. I can use my fingers to kind of spread my toes apart a little bit, and then just rolling my toes around can feel really good. Make sure you do both feet. For the midfoot, that region from the base of the toes right about to this point in the middle of the arch is where those metatarsal bones are. And they are long bones of the feet, kind of like the long bones of your hand right here. And that part is, it gets a little neglected. We can mobilize that area a little bit by simply grabbing your forefoot and just moving those bones around. This is called joint mobilization. A lot of physical therapists and athletic trainers will do this in rehab, but you don't have to know all the anatomy to get some benefit from moving this around. You can wiggle those bones past each other. You can grab the foot and turn it into supination and pronation. You can use one hand to stabilize while you do that back and forth. I broke my foot last fall, so I'm careful with this because that rotation, I can feel that just a little bit at the base of this fifth bone here. So I'm just being mindful of that. Then when you get into this midfoot region, right around the middle of the arch, that's where those tarsal bones are. There's joints in between all of these bones. And so this is the point of mobilizing, is getting those joints a little bit freer because they get stiff over time. So again, using one hand to stabilize, using the other hand to grab that area, and you can just move things around. You can rock them, rotate them. Lots of options here for trying to get some movement in a foot. And again, you can massage the bottom of your foot with your thumbs. For me, stiff feet, high arch, it feels really good. And then for the heel, right here, this calcaneus, you can cup that heel right here with your hand. And again, maybe you want to stabilize part of your foot or part of your lower leg, and I can rock this heel right around. You might get some clicking and popping and things like that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If you don't have pain, you're probably okay doing that kind of mobilization. Okay, so that's some basic mobilization of the foot. Now, for the lower leg, which is part of the extension of that foot, all of this tissue and fascia that come down into the foot can affect the way the foot moves. So we're going to address all this up here in a little bit with some other tools. But some people be asking me about foam rolling the foot. This is your basic foam roller. It's just cut in half. Part of the reason this isn't awesome for the foot, you can see, is because my foot is small and this is pretty big. Now, it's not that this feels bad, but I'm probably not getting maximal benefit from this. So something smaller, can of soup, can of tomato paste, something along those lines. This is the core, cardboard core of something we used to use in the athletic training room. So if you know an athletic trainer, know an athletic training student, you could try to get one of these from them. I like it because it's nice and firm, but the cylinder feels good because it runs the whole width of my foot. So you can do this seated like I was just a second ago. I like to have a little downward pressure here. So I kind of come up to my knees. You could also do it sitting on the edge of your bed. Sometimes I'll do that in the morning before I even stand up. My feet get stiff. I have some history of plantar fasciitis, so every once in a while when my feet start to tighten up and I feel stiff, I'll keep this right by the edge of my bed. And I'll just roll on this in the morning before I even stand all the way up. The plantar fascia and those tendons, like I said, they go all the way through the foot, all the way up into the toes. So the reason I choose this over a ball, and it's not wrong, it's just my choice, is that it's easier for me to get all of those structures at once. And I can go all the way up into my toes a little easier than if I'm using the ball. So you can also do this standing. Start nice and slow though, with just a little bit of pressure, especially if your feet are stiff and sore. If there's not a lot of blood flow in there and you press too hard in the beginning, you might end up causing a little bit of pain. So if you have a spot in there somewhere that feels a little stiffer, a little tighter, or just kind of like a trigger point, you can go at it a little bit more specifically with a ball. And when you're on the ball, you can just roll around. You can stay in one spot, kind of like we did with the foam roller last week for the hip. You can just play around with stuff. These are just 3 different balls. The only thing that's different about them is density. This is a racket ball, nice and squishy. This is a practice ball for lacrosse, so it's got some play, and a lacrosse ball that's a lot harder. So just like the foam rollers, just choosing different densities that feel better. Okay, so the shin and the calf, we can use the foam roller for those as well. Remember, this big muscle back here runs right down into the Achilles. So using the foam roller through that tissue can be really beneficial. Now, you can keep your butt down here. If you want more leverage, you can go up onto your hands with one leg supporting on the floor, or if you wanted even more pressure, I could stack my legs like I did last week with the hamstring. This is a lot of pressure, so it might not be comfortable for everybody. You can rotate your foot in and out. Just don't ever want to go all the way up into this knee space right here. Got a big artery and a nerve right there, so resting in there is not a safe thing. So either below or above, but not right in there. So that big muscle right there we just talked about. You also have a little muscle, a littler muscle, that sits underneath this big muscle. And the only way to target that really is at that inside border right here. So here's my shin bone, my tibia, and you can see this ridge that I'm outlining right here. And right behind that is that smaller muscle we were talking about, the soleus. That's a little bit of a, he's a troublemaker, that one. So that's a really good one to try to get at. You can either get at it a little bit yourself manually, but just working that tissue and softening it away from the bone. If you find a spot that's pretty tight, like right here is pretty tight for me, I can hold it. I can use a ball and lay down on it. Got some different options. You can also use the foam roller to get at that a little bit, but you have to keep the foot relaxed, because if the foot is pulled back, this muscle stays a little bit tighter and it's harder to get at that border. So relax the foot so this can get out of the way, and then you can just rest on that foam roller, rolling right behind the lip of that bone like I just showed you. And again, if you feel that spot that was tight, just hang out there for a little bit. You can make small rocking motions or just stay in one place. Okay, the front of the shin is also very important. Often not an area that gets rolled or worked on very much. But again, always self-massage techniques. Anytime you're doing massage through a long muscle, think about pushing it toward the heart. You want to, if you're releasing toxins and adhesions and things like that, you want the blood system, the circulatory system, to push that up toward the heart to get it out. So working this way, but I can also use the foam roller again. So if I put this foam roller on the ground and rest my leg down so my knee is just in front of the foam roller, again, I can roll back and forth on this shin. If I want more pressure, I can put both legs on here. Obviously, it'd be a little easier on a wider foam roller. You can go all the way down to that space right at the top of the feet. Now, let's say I felt something in there that was very specific. Again, I could take my balls, any of these balls here, choice, I'm going to use the softer one here, and I felt a spot right about there, so I can put that right underneath my leg. And if I want more pressure, I can sit back on my feet. That might be pretty intense, so maybe you just want to sort of rock back and forth here. And I'm getting multiple benefits in this position. Not only am I getting the pressure of the ball right here, but I'm also stretching that tissue across the top of my lower leg, right at the base of my knee, and also across the ankle. So it's sort of like direct pressure while I'm lengthening and shortening the muscle. So there's some benefits all around there. I can do that same technique with the ball on my calf, using my thigh then to create pressure. And I can move that ball around into different positions. Okay? If I want a little bit more pressure there, I might choose to bring my feet up and get a foot stretch at the same time. Lots of different techniques. The last thing I want to talk about for foot mobilization is simply different positions that you can put your feet into to stretch them and mobilize them. So one position is just like I'm sitting right now. One knee down, one knee up, sitting on this foot. When I'm in this position, I'm getting the benefit of mobilizing not only this back foot where my toes are down, but this front foot at the ankle. So as I rock back and forth, I'm getting mobilization right here in this joint, flexion, extension, particularly this position right here. I have a lot of old ankle sprains, So my left ankle is actually worse than my right, but when I get to a certain place, I might choose to hold still and stretch that a little bit. But I'm also getting the benefit every time I rock backwards of mobilizing right here, this ankle. So you can change your position a little bit, your focus, whether it's this front one or the back one. And then you're going to do the same thing on the other side. Now, I can also put both knees down and work on my toes a little bit more by having my toes in this position, rocking forward and backward so my toes are tucked under. And I might choose in that position to rock back a little bit further. I told you I have funky toes, so I have a hard time getting these last two toes into a flexed position or an extended position. So sometimes I'll actually use my fingers to place them in a position I want and then go back into that rocking back and forth. You can do the same thing with that toe flexion where I might decide to rock up onto my toes a little bit more. All of these motions should be done with care. Care, paying attention to your joints, any twinges of pain. I would expect in certain situations, if your feet have been stiff for quite some time, that you might get a little discomfort, but there's a big difference between discomfort and pain, and knowing that fine line. So start slowly. Any work that you do is going to create change. And then as you start to get used to those feelings, you can work through some of those different mobilizing techniques a little bit more extensively. Thanks for joining me today, everybody. Have a great week. Oh, don't forget to check out our YouTube channel, Evolve Connect. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Please share it with your friends. Please subscribe. The more followers we get, the more creativity we have. And also, we started live streaming classes from our website, Evolutions. So please check that out. You can stream those from anywhere in the world and join us for our classes.